what's going on when you're training kids, what's going on when you're training adults, and obviously how we're going to have some slightly different considerations depending on who we're working with. So do you guys have any questions overall when it comes to differences between training adults and training kids? So just a few quick definitions to understand. Growth, we're obviously talking about change in both the body or different body parts. Development, now we're talking about differentiation, functional changes, things like going through puberty. And maturation is going to be actually turning into your adult form. Now, there's going to effectively be a number of different ages here. We've got chronological age, so that's effectively how many days, months, and years you've not been in the womb for. You've got skeletal age, which is going to be a little bit more of like how well developed your skeleton is. So some folks develop at a slower rate, some folks develop at a faster rate. And effectively, what stage of sexual maturation? So are we still talking about somebody that's pre-puberty, in puberty, post-puberty? And so obviously each of these have their own time clock. I'm quite sure some of you guys were full grown when you were 12, and some of you guys were not fully grown until you were nearly in your 20s. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's just the reality of how things work. The key thing is when we're still developing, our growth plates aren't fused yet. So doing true maximal lifting, meaning 1RM testing, is just dumb. It's not worth it. Your risk reward ratio is inverted unless you're fully developed. So if you've got a 12-year-old woman or a 12-year-old man, then by all means, go ahead, max them out. But if you're still working with an 18-year-old boy, 18-year-old girl, having them to do a lot of really heavy 1RM testing is not really worth it, but doing a lot of lifting is fine. Lifting will not stunt your growth. Arguably, that seems to be something that's left over from some kids that were forced to do manual labor while eating and being undernourished. Specifically, I believe it was actually in Japan in the 1930s and 40s, according to Avery Feigenbaum. And so at the end of the day, that's where that entire like cliche of like, don't lift weights, they'll stunt your growth, what that started from, which was just a major misinterpretation of effectively malnourishing. You should start lifting the second you're outside of the womb. You should start lifting your body on a daily basis. Now, as far as to be in a true periodized program, so when you're talking to actual barbell, dumbbell, kettlebell, etc. style training, this is something that should be introduced at whatever age works for them when it comes to maturity. Okay, we're not talking about sexual maturity, we're talking about literally maturity whenever it comes to working with them. As in, are they mature enough to listen to your directions? Are they mature enough to make sure that they're going to actually spot each other, that they're going to follow each other around the weight room? I mean, obviously, there are certain collegiate athletes that are not mature enough still to really be in a weight room full time. And that's why they get kicked out on occasion by the strength conditioning staff. But at the end of the day, if you've got a 6-year-old that really wants to try lifting weights, there's nothing wrong with that. The key is there's no point in chasing maximal numbers and really trying to max them out because, once again, their body is not finished developing. They've not effectively had all those growth plates fuse shut, so they're as tall as they're going to be. So don't worry about trying to really have them hit max numbers until they're effectively, ready to do so. Does that answer your question, Zach?
Yeah. So basically, like, just don't have them lift stuff that's going to put like strain on their body.
No, you can definitely have them lift stuff that puts strain on their body. I was a fat kid doing a push-up with strain on my body. The big key is we're not trying to do excessive maximal loading. So let's say you've got, because I know you've worked with high school strength conditioning or high school football team, you've got some 15-year-old men and some 18-year-old boys. The key is just have them train in like the 10, maybe as low as the 5-rep range, and really, really highlighting technique, which is probably the last thing that really happens in a high school weight room. Because like anything else, we want to make sure that we've got a good movement pattern base we're working from, and then worry about adding performance on top. So when you're working with these athletes, don't worry so much about we need to chase maximal numbers. Instead, like, let's just get stronger, let's be in better condition, and let's make sure we move well. If you can do all of those, you've got a pretty good base of fitness, and you really get performance on top of that. Because if we weren't allowed to do maximal efforts of anything, you wouldn't be able to play any sport. because at some point you're going to give a true maximal effort. And obviously we're pretty comfortable with putting kids through things like the Little League World Series. So we're really comfortable with them throwing or doing a throwing motion with maximal effort, Lord knows how many times. That's also, there's some interesting things about peaking athletes early and burnout. But either way, don't be afraid of the movements. Just keep in mind, what's the point of saying you are a teenage national champion in powerlifting? Congratulations, you're competing in a sport that a lot of people don't, and you're competing at an age most rational people never should, and you hit the peak of your life when you were in middle school. Instead, focus on the long-term development of an athlete. Does that make sense? Thanks. So now one thing that's important to keep in mind, guys, is what's known as peak height velocity. And this is the point of which you are literally growing faster than you will at any other point in your life, aka your growth spurt. When an athlete is going through their peak height velocity, this is where they have some of the greater risks of actually getting injured, because their tendons, their muscles, and even their ligaments to a certain extent all have to lengthen because their bones are lengthening so quickly. And since their movement patterns are changing, everything now has a much bigger range of motion than it did, you actually increase the risk of injury. So soccer firms, so we're talking like the professional soccer leagues over in the UK, literally they track the height changes of their developmental athletes. And whenever they hit their growth spurts, that's when they purposely cut back their training volume and focus more on mobility with these athletes, because they don't want to increase the risk of injury, because they got a lot of money invested in these kids up to this point, and they want to make sure they keep improving. So obviously, once you get done with puberty, we're going to slow down again until we eventually stop. And that's where we shouldn't be obviously as concerned about really loading them up and trying to see what they're capable of. Now, when it comes to weight change, that's just something that's going to naturally occur depending on obviously eating for that growth. Like anything else, putting an athlete or putting a kid in a weight class sport, there's some concerns there with potentially stunting their overall growth. I personally wouldn't want to subject a child to it unless, once again, this is something that they really, really want to do. Just like specialization in children is stupid. You should allow kids to play as many different sports as they want. So, yeah, go figure. Your bones at some point are going to fuse. We want to make sure we have higher bone mineral density, because then we're less likely to injure them. Not going to insult your intelligence. I'm sure you guys all understand that. We tend to increase our muscle mass. Guys, it's going to increase even more so, obviously, especially once we hit puberty. And like anything else, peaks at 25 for the guys who aren't trying. Like anything else, as long as you're giving your body a reason to get stronger, you are going to get stronger. Obviously, the second you no longer give your body a reason to get stronger, it's going to go backwards. There's no point in holding on to more muscle mass than you need. But I feel like a lot of this stuff is otherwise pretty simple and straightforward, nothing too crazy. You know, we tend to accrue body fat as we get older, and we tend to have higher body fat percentages, typically in women compared to men, especially once we go through puberty. And yeah, turns out we need to get better at movements before we really want to worry about maxing them out. Yeah. A lot of the same responses you're going to see from adults, you're going to see in children. It's going to be much slower, meaning you're not going to be gaining strength as rapidly until we get to those peak levels, thanks to effectively, or we're really going to be able to increase them once again because we've finished up with puberty. And women also are going to increase our androgens at this point also. So it's going to help a little bit with muscle mass gain. Any questions? I know I'm kind of burning through this, but a lot of the stuff is relatively straightforward. What is interesting is obviously you're small. Your lungs are going to get bigger. All of your different aerobic capacities are going to improve as you get older, simply because you now have been on this planet for a much longer period of time, and it's going to go ahead and increase because you've had more time to train. Your lungs are bigger, your heart's bigger because your body's bigger. And we're typically going to see that your VO2 max is going to peak somewhere, or arguably in your early 20s, but if you're really training hard, you might not hit your peak until you're in your 40s. So, yeah. Now, I really enjoy that point. I want one of you guys to tell me why children's economy of effort is worse than adults. Why are children's economies of effort worse than adults? Raquan, what do you think, bud?
I think adults might be working for something different goal than children would be.
Okay, remember, economy of effort is effectively how much energy it takes to do a given movement. So why do you think your average adult wouldn't have to spend as much energy doing something like running compared to a little kid? And I do mean little. It's not so much the development of the body. Raquan, come back, man. We're not done. I believe in you. Okay, so Raquan, have you ever watched like a 3-year-old try to run?
Yeah.
What's that look like?
Teletubby waddling.
Yeah, why do you think they're waddling and they're all over the place?
Bodies is not as advanced. I don't know.
Okay, so keep in mind when we're talking about economy of effort, it's not about one body's more efficient than the other. It's all about what's in control of that body, which is the nervous system. Little kid's nervous system is not that well developed yet. It's just like if we also looked at a 6-year-old's handwriting compared to that same kid when they're 12, same kid when they're 18, it's going to improve because they're going to be able to practice it more and do more repetitions. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So little kids have to use more energy to do the same amount of exercise because they're just really inefficient. And Trendon, you are not wrong, but the key is when we paint with a wide brush of saying adult bodies are more efficient. Oh no, I've seen some adults who got way, way worse running technique than children. And especially I go to the rec on occasion and I see how good some of our students and student athletes are at doing simple movements like the back squat and realize we got a lot of room to improve for a lot of people. Does that make sense, guys? All right, thank you. Anaerobic capacity is going to be a bit lower, sorry. And we're going to also improve our ATP PCR a little bit as we get older, but it's not going to be as near as much of a change as we're going to get from our glycolytic system. And obviously, once we go ahead and get those endocrine changes, we're going to get bigger effects as we get older, but at the same time, we're going to see that our body is going to have a greater growth hormone and IGF, insulin-like growth hormone response from training. So any questions about anything else? Like when it comes to working with kids, if you guys have any questions from more of an exercise physiology, but at the same time, if you're going to work with kids, the key is making sure that we're introducing exercise in a way that's creating essentially good habits. They're not just learning good technique, but they're also enjoying exercise. Because like anything else, a lot of different points of exercise for people growing up, the ones that don't like to exercise, usually it's because sometimes because they had a very, very bad experience with a coach, PE teacher, or something else where they're like, F this, I'm out, I don't want to do this ever again. So the goal is, like anything else, we're working with kids, you got to make it fun. A lot of people don't like to lift weights, and that's okay. A lot of people don't like to run distance, and that's okay. A lot of people, most people are going to hopefully find something when it comes to a physical experience. It could be hiking, it could be rock climbing, it could be, I don't know, what's something absurd that you guys would, or that's not fair. What's something that you guys really enjoy when it comes to just physical activity that a lot of people wouldn't necessarily, think of when it comes to burning calories, helping you stay healthy and otherwise. Nothing. We're all basic and boring. No one likes to do anything to help them stay physically fit other than your typical run of the mill things. Yeah. Playing basketball, playing sports. So, like anything else, when we're working with kids, we do want to make sure we're decreasing our risk of injury because same thing, you're so young, the last thing you want to do is be hobbled where you've had to have a knee surgery, you've had to have a elbow, shoulder, anything else repaired, or sometimes you can do irreparable damage the body's not going to be able to repair itself from, even with surgical intervention. You've just capped effectively how high that person's going to go for the rest of their life. So there's a number of different guidelines of things to do. At the end of the day, for those of you guys that are maybe thinking about having children or wanting to have children, et cetera, along those lines, my personal advice, if you're working with kids, or sorry, if you have a kid and you really want to effectively allow them the best opportunity to be a really good athlete, I would advise you to go ahead and have them be exposed to as many different sports as possible. That way they can try a wide variety of different movement patterns. They can try a wide variety of different skills, different challenges on their body. Now, when they're very young, meaning we're talking preschool age, I would thoroughly suggest exposing them to gymnastics, swimming, and of all things, potentially wrestling. Gymnastics, because you learn how to fall, you learn how to roll, you learn how to interact with your body on a solid surface. Swimming, because unfortunately a number of people drown every single year in bodies of water that are not very deep simply because they do not have the skill of knowing how to swim. And then the third of learning how to wrestle and otherwise, not necessarily they've got to go into MMA or jujitsu, but some sport where they learn how to overcome another individual that they actually have to put hands on, because that type of skill is going to show up in a lot of different sports and then also in life in general. Now, from there, if a kid wants to specialize, meaning they want to be insert this sport only athlete, and that's truly what they want, that's where specialization may or may not allow them to hit a higher level. Usually your athletes that specialize early outside of a very thin number of sports, meaning it's wrestling, gymnastics, figure skating, and diving, they tend to have a much lower ceiling of performance because they've got an only typically very uniform and single area developed athleticism. So you should instead aim to go ahead and have those athletes develop them, or those kids develop themselves in as many different athletic endeavors. And then once you get to high school age, that's where specialization seems to be more important. But even then, if you're that great of an athlete, somebody's going to find you, somebody will give you a scholarship, somebody's going to recruit you. If you're spending all that money and time on privates, travel sports, and everything else, you're specializing an athlete, and the return on investment there is nowhere near as good as the same return on investment you're going to have for your kid if they just go to a tutor and get better grades so they can probably get an academic scholarship. Those pay better, plus you don't have to worry about brain injuries. Questions there about when we're working with kids and the basic development things that we're going to see? Yeah. One thing to keep in mind is little kids are usually not as good at dealing with heat, much less cold. So it's just important to keep in mind what's going on and that we're obviously keeping track of what's occurring with their tolerance for the exercise and otherwise. Just because you did this back in my day doesn't mean it's what's optimal for kids. So then we've got the other end of the spectrum, which is dealing with us old folks. And by us old folks, I mean, it's actually people that are older than me. Turns out, in general, all your performances are going to start going down, and it is depressing. First thing that's going to go down is actually going to be your eyesight along with your max speed. That usually is going to start to decrease in your late 20s, early 30s. From there, max strength, you're going to start to lose that probably in your 40s, along with maximal aerobic endurance. And then you're really just polishing the brass on the Titanic after your 60s. You're just trying to hold on. And that's okay. That's okay. Like anything else, it typically tends to be because partially because we're just being more sedentary. You're not as physically active. You're not obviously doing as much work. So the body's going to backslide. And what we're going to find is a decrease, not just in muscle mass and then initially an increase in fat mass, but eventually a decrease in all mass as we get older. We're also going to start shrinking thanks to literally those compression, those intervertebral discs, along with bad posture. It's where you start to see those folks that are just nice and kyphotic and rounded over, thanks to, unfortunately, bad posture for very, very long periods of time. So yeah, the same relate with the weight. Decrease in muscle mass is much more drastic in men than it is women, just simply because men typically have more muscle mass. That being said, you can still have relatively high amounts of lean mass as long as you're doing something about it. Now, hormonal changes are going to affect this. Bone mineral content is going to go down because you're not as physically active. I think a lot of this is relatively simple and straightforward, that, when in doubt, you can always overcome all of these through simply exercising and eating correctly. Those are going to improve your body's performance unless you're already working with somebody that's pretty well trained and in really good condition. So in general, our neurological component might go down a little bit. That's probably more or less lack of specificity and not doing as much work as you once were. And you can obviously help abate this by simply training and still having a pretty decent amount of force production ability. So I move that over. Yeah. Muscle mass loss, typically more of your type 2, and they think it's actually due to, unfortunately, the death of your type 2 motor neurons. And what we're going to have is a greater amount of type 1, so more aerobic. So if we train, we can effectively try to maintain this, but at the same time, it's not going to give us the same amount of effect. So questions, comments, concerns with as you get to be older, everything just starts to suck a little bit more. Oh no. You have a rough day at the competition?
He did. He missed, I think it was like 650. And he goes for that for his second attempt every time, and he missed it completely.
Whoa. Didn't he just hit like a partial deadlift of 900 and something?
I don't know. I didn't see it.
Wow.
Maybe Davey, but
Oh
not
yeah,
Rob.
I think I'm mixing my mechanics. I'm sorry, guys. Those are two pretty good strongman / power lifters that live in Kentucky near Lexington. So they did a charity benefit meet this weekend. So yeah, man, that sucks. Sorry to hear that. But then again, I need to get back in the arena too, but that's my own problem. Now, in general, if you tend to maintain your same intensity for a long period of time, you can still have pretty great levels of fitness. And look at this, guys. When it comes to VO2 max, untrained, yep, you weren't great to start and you suck more every single year. But if you at least try and stay training at the same intensity, notice you are going to go downwards, but you still have a VO2 max of 60, which is better than mine is currently. And one of the biggest drivers of all these changes as we get older, guys, is always going to come down to genetics. So thanks to, mom and dad, that's the thing that we can't control, but we can control our diet and we can control our exercise and we can control our recovery. Those three variables are the ones that are going to allow us to hold on to what levels of physical fitness and ability you'd like to have. So, like anything else, we are going to see some changes as we get older. Everything tends to go down a little bit. You still maintain a certain amount of adaptability. You're just not going to be effectively as great as you once were. And if you've never really trained, you still have a great capacity to increase your performance. And so, yep, all goes down. Wah, wah. So overall, any questions, comments, concerns? So we have somebody get kicked out and then we got to come back in. All right. So now we're going to do our first thought exercise, which is going to help you guys lead into the final. Okay. Effectively, what we're going to have you guys do is we're going to divide you into 4 groups. Now, effectively, what I want you guys to fully conceptualize is what would happen if we could somehow unplug your brain and put it in another person's body. So as soon as you were effectively transitioning from your body to another person's body, what all is going to change? Oh yeah, it's awesome because I don't know if you guys have had a chance to read the book, much less watch the Netflix series Altered Carbon, but that is heavily influenced the way that I've written this final, because I find it to be incredibly fascinating thought exercises. Yes, your whole nervous system is going to be different, but I want you guys to think through all the things that are going to change. So if you guys get a chance, you don't have to watch the entire series, just watch the preview and you can kind of figure out what I'm working at here, which is if we could effectively swap your brain into another person's body, what would be all of the things that would immediately be different for you? What would effectively be the major things that you would encounter in just say those first 24 hours? And then from there, the final then extrapolates like, okay, if you could pick a specific type of body to be put in for different types of physiological tasks, what type of body would you want to be in? What are the different, muscle physiology components, cardiovascular physiology components, all of the different components you would like to have modified? But for now, today, in your groups, I want you guys to effectively talk out, and just for this example, because I know it works for everybody, okay? If everyone here is familiar with the basketball player Shaquille O'Neal, correct? All right, you can obviously use the power of Google if you've never heard of Shaq. How many of you guys know of the actor Peter Dinklage? He not only was obviously in Game of Thrones, but fun fact, he was also the guy that played the South Pole elf in the movie Elf. So if you were to wake up in either of those gentlemen's bodies, what would immediately be different? Like, how would that physiologically feel? And really, okay, yes, you're going to be taller, so you're going to see the world from a different perspective, or obviously much shorter if you're Peter Dinklage. Keep going, guys. Keep going. Think through how many things would be different, okay? We're going to break you guys into 4 groups, talk through all the different things that you guys would have, and we're going to put up in the chat at the end of this all the things that you would feel differently. Yes, obviously their weight is different, but keep thinking further about that than just the weight and just the height, because remember the anthropometrics from biomechanics and apply those accordingly. So have fun, guys. We're going to report back at about 2:10 with all the different things that you would experience. Go for it.